The dust hadn't yet settled over the smoldering fields of Slovenia. The echoes of the Battle of Ljubljana still lingered across the continent, and already new thunder began to rise from the north. While the Danube Compact licked its wounds, and the Balkans reinforced their newfound unity, another storm gathered along the Baltic frontier. Poland, triumphant in diplomacy and unbroken by war, saw the moment it had waited for, the final blow against the Baltic Resistance. In Warsaw's command centers, the air was electric with anticipation. Poland had watched the Danube Compact stumble in the south. It had seen Germany's patience turn into covert aggression across the Irish Sea. And now, with its rear secured and no enemy capable of striking its borders, it was time for Poland to end the rebellion that had defied it for months. Warsaw, execute Operation Northstar, advance on Latvia. Total suppression of Baltic insurgency. Columns of Polish armor began to move. The roads from Białystok and Suwałki choked with convoys, endless lines of mechanized units, artillery batteries, and armored transports grinding toward the north. Dust clouds rolled across the highways, and the sound of engines echoed across the countryside like distant thunder. Villages emptied as the columns advanced. Farmers watched in silence as the armored tide passed, the red and white markings flashing in the sunlight. Overhead, surveillance aircraft traced circles in the sky, feeding live updates to the advancing formations. The Baltic Resistance, battered but unbroken, scrambled to prepare. Their numbers were smaller, their weapons older, but their will was unshaken. Makeshift defenses were raised along the Daugava River. Trenches were dug overnight. Bridges were rigged with explosives, ready to be destroyed the moment Polish armor appeared. Every small town became a fortress. Every crossroad, a trap. At dawn, the first Polish scouts crossed the border, and the silence shattered. The lead armored divisions advanced in a thunderous wave. Engines roared, the ground trembling beneath the movement of steel. They bypassed the minor villages and surged straight toward Daugavpils, the linchpin of the Resistance's defense line. Artillery opened up from the forests beyond the river. Shells rained down on Polish spearheads, throwing columns of dirt and fire into the air. Resistance fighters, hidden among the tree lines, launched sudden ambushes, firing and disappearing before the counterattack could reach them. But the Polish advance did not slow. Tank formations pushed through the bombardment, flanking fire positions and breaking into the outer defenses of Daugavpils. Within hours, the outskirts were engulfed in smoke and fire. Entire streets became battlegrounds. Short, brutal exchanges fought from window to window, courtyard to courtyard. Polish infantry followed the armor, sweeping through the ruins while artillery struck deeper into the city. Resistance units fell back to the bridges, detonating them one by one to delay pursuit. The Daugava River turned black with oil and ash. For a brief moment, the resistance held. Small units struck from the forests, targeting fuel trucks and supply convoys. At night, tracer fire cut across the tree lines as both sides fought in confusion. The smell of burning fuel and wet earth filled the air. But numbers told the story. By the second day, Polish armored brigades had encircled the surviving defenders. Daugavpils fell by midday. The remaining resistance fighters retreated north, blowing up roads and leaving traps in their wake. But the pressure never eased. By the third morning, the Polish advance was at the gates of Riga. The Baltic commanders, knowing this would be their last stand, called every surviving unit to the capital. Trenches were dug along the industrial outskirts. Civilian trucks were converted into barricades. The old defensive walls, relics from another century, became firing positions once again. The Poles advanced relentlessly. Columns of tanks rolled through the highways south of the city, supported by artillery stationed far behind. Each volley shook the earth. Waves of infantry followed in coordination, clearing block by block as the resistance fell back. In the narrow industrial zones, the battle reached its peak. Entire warehouses turned into strong points. Resistance fighters fought from the upper floors, forcing Polish armor to blast through walls to advance. Fires raged across the skyline. The night was illuminated by the orange glow of burning oil and shattered glass. And yet, even surrounded, the Baltic fighters refused to yield. They launched sudden counterattacks in the suburbs, striking from the smoke, halting columns long enough to evacuate their wounded. For a few desperate hours, it seemed the Polish assault might stall. But by dusk, the balance broke. Coordinated artillery barrages silenced the last major resistance pockets. The defenders' communications collapsed, and their remaining forces were cut apart in the city's center. By nightfall, the red and white banners of Poland were raised over the Riga skyline. The Baltic Resistance had been annihilated. Poland's victory was absolute. What had begun as an internal rebellion had ended as a conquest. The last organized units of the Baltic Resistance surrendered or fled north toward Estonia. Roads were littered with wrecked vehicles, burned weapons, and silent fields where the fighting had ended only hours before. And within days, Estonia made its decision. Tallinn issued a single stark message to Warsaw. Tallinn to Warsaw. We will not resist. Estonia surrenders unconditionally. Warsaw's reply was brief. Warsaw to Tallinn, acknowledged. Maintain order. Polish forces will occupy key installations until stability is secured. No shots were fired. No columns of smoke rose over Tallinn. For the first time in months, the northern horizon was still. But peace, once again, was an illusion. In the aftermath of Poland's triumph, the world's focus shifted westward. Germany, patient and methodical, had been waiting for its own moment to ignite chaos. Deep inside the cities of Northern Ireland, the first sparks of rebellion appeared. Coordinated explosions struck infrastructure in Belfast, Derry, and Newry. Communication lines were cut. Armored patrols were ambushed. Fires consumed government buildings as panic spread through the streets. Anonymous broadcasts claimed responsibility in the name of a new movement. But the precision, the planning, the resources spoke of something larger. German support had arrived. Berlin to Dublin. Your courage has been acknowledged. Continue pressure. Disrupt logistics and morale. The Isles must fracture from within. The British government was thrown into panic. Reinforcements were rushed north. Cities went into lockdown. Curfews were declared as troops fortified critical infrastructure. London to Dublin, cease your action. If these acts persist, Britain will respond with full force. This is your only warning. But Dublin's silence spoke louder than any reply. And then, just as the United Kingdom began to restore order, the greatest shock of all arrived from within its own borders. From Edinburgh came the announcement, calm, deliberate, and world-shaking. Edinburgh. Effective immediately, Scotland recognizes itself as an independent and sovereign state. The authority of Westminster no longer applies north of the border. The reaction in London was disbelief, then fury. Officials declared the act illegal and refused recognition. But with forces stretched thin across Northern Ireland and domestic unrest rising, the government could do little more than issue threats. Technically, Scotland was independent. Practically, the United Kingdom was breaking apart. Across the continent, leaders watched in uneasy silence. The Danube Compact had failed in the south. Poland now controlled the entire Baltic region. Germany had opened a covert front against Britain, and the United Kingdom itself was fracturing under internal pressure. What began as isolated fires had now spread across Europe's every corner. From Ljubljana's plains to Riga's ruins, from Belfast's shadows to Edinburgh's halls. Warsaw celebrated its victory, but could not ignore the unease. Berlin was silent, but surely planning its next move. The Balkans, emboldened and united, watched both north and west, knowing their moment might soon come again. The continent stood on the brink once more. No one dared to predict where the next spark would fall. Because in a Europe like this, there were no peace treaties, only pauses between storms.